What's up, everyone? In this video, I'm going to be talking about melodic structure, tendency pairs, and how composers use stability and instability to write compelling melodies. My name is Mathew. I'm a composer and cellist and the founder of the Sound Painters Studio. I got my PhD in music composition at Northwestern University, and now I'm on a mission to help composers and musicians to gain the skills and confidence to be able to bring their music to life with a greater amount of emotional depth. So let's get into tendency pairs in the major and minor scales. So the way that I like to think about it is that there are a few very stable points in the major and minor scales, namely scale degrees 1, 3, and 5, which everything else gravitates to. All of the tendency pairs that resolve to each of those points will reach a certain level of stability based on the stabilities of 1, 3, and 5, where 1 is the greatest and 5 is the weakest. So if we break it down, starting first with the tendency pairs that gravitate towards scale degree 1, the first one that we have is 2 to 1. The second one that we have is going to be 7 to 1. 7 to 1 is our leading tone, and so it pulls towards the tonic naturally. The last tendency pair that we have with scale degree 1 is 5 to 1. The next one up, scale degree 3, which is the second most stable, we have 4 to 3, and we also have 2 to 3. And I'm going to get into how each of these sound at the piano a little bit later in the video. Lastly, we have 6 to 5. So in total, there are 6 tendency pairs. Let's see how each of these tendency pairs sounds at the piano. I'm going to start first with the tendency pairs that gravitate towards scale degree 1. We're going to listen in C major. I'll put the chords on the screen so you can see what I'm playing. Tendency pairs that we talked about, 2 to 1, you can hear how this D wants to resolve down to C. There's a gravitational pull towards the tonic. Now we can think of the same thing if we play the leading tone that wants to come back home. If we play the dominant, scale degree 5, there's a certain amount of restlessness charged into that note that when we go up to tonic, it's resolved. Now if we go to scale degree 3, we have 2 to 3, which can go to scale degree 3. It's a little bit weaker than if we were to go to the tonic, scale degree 1, but still works as a resolution. Or we could have 4 to 3. And lastly, we talked about scale degree 5 as the third weakest but still stable point in the diatonic scale. So we can go from 6 to 5. Now that's major. Let's talk about minor, because there are a couple of nuances that we need to account for. So again, let's establish our key. So in the key of C minor, normally what we're going to do, especially with our leading tone, is we're going to raise it. So this is our harmonic minor scale that we talked about in a previous lesson. If we are going to use the tendency pairs, normally 7 to 1 is going to be raised. So basically all of the tendency pairs are going to be the same, except that we need to raise 7 to 1 to be a sharped 7 to 1. In this case, because we're in a flat key, the sharp is a natural that goes up to scale degree 1. But everything else is the same. Okay, so let's contrast these. Those are the tendency pairs in major, and now in minor. So there you have it, tendency pairs on the piano. Let's see these tendency pairs in action in actual music. Let's look at this example from Chopin's music, a nocturne, opus 15, number 1. So the first thing that we have to do is listen to it, because listening is going to give us a lot of insight, because our intuition and our experience of having listened to music is going to guide us when we're making analytical decisions. So whenever you are going to do music analysis, the very, very first thing that you should do before even looking at the score is listen to the music. So let's just listen to this melody really quick. Now that we've listened to the melody, let's identify some key information first. The first thing that we want to do is label the key signature. So if we remember from the circle of fifths, when we have one flat, we basically have two options. We have either F major or D minor. So the way that we're going to determine whether it's F major or D minor, there's one key thing that happens in minor, which is going to be a huge clue. And it's when we have a raised leading tone. So if we think of D minor as the tonic, then C sharp must appear somewhere in the score. If it doesn't, then we may not be in D minor. Another thing that we can look for is strategic placements of certain notes. So I notice in the first measure, we have an F and it's preceded by a C. So this leap is a fourth. And very often, if you see a fourth that goes to an F and we have one flat, most likely this is going to be scale degree 5 leaping into scale degree 1. There are no C sharps, so I'm going to take a guess that this is going to be an F major, and that's how we're going to analyze it. It could change later in the score, but for now, I think it's safe to say that this example is an F major. The second thing that we want to do in order to analyze the tendency pairs in the score is to label the scale degrees. So let's just quickly write out all the scale degrees. Okay, now we have all our scale degrees in place. The next step is going to be to figure out where the tendency pairs are. So let's write them out on the score so that we have a reference. So since we're in F major, we're going to write out our major ones, starting with the ones that are grouped to scale degree 1. So first we have 2 to 1, then we have 7 to 1, then we have 5 to 1. The next group we have is 2 to 3, and 4 to 3. And lastly, we have 6 to 5. This is just going to be a helpful bank to be able to identify where these are. And I'm going to do this in another color. So we have 5 moving to scale degree 1. After that, we get scale degree 7 that doesn't go immediately to 1. So if we were to listen to that at the piano, you'll notice that by not going to scale degree 1, it creates tension. And so Chopin is obviously doing this on purpose. He doesn't want to get to 1 too fast because it's going to close the phrase too quickly. Instead, he delays, goes to 5, which as you remember from earlier is less stable, and then makes his way back up to 1 on beat 2, which is not quite a strong beat. You know, if we think about the downbeats as stronger points. Instead, it happens in passing, and the point that's really drawing your attention is scale degree 3, which is the apex or the highest note of this entire phrase. So what we can do in order to understand this is we can see that the 7 goes through this point to rest at the 5 and then passes through all of these motions to get to 1, which is sort of stable parenthetically, but the real point that we want to get to is going to be this 3. And I'm going to put a double circle around it to show that this note is the one that Chopin is drawing your attention to. So let's just listen to this fragment. This is the way that composers are able to use the tendency pairs in the major scale to be able to create tension and release in unexpected, surprising ways. So this is how you can do this in your own music. Just because we have these tendency pairs doesn't mean that they're strictly shackled into these relationships. You can loosely use them to structure a powerful melody so that your music feels like it has a greater amount of depth to it. And that's what we want, right? If we move forward, we have some other motions that we can track that are more predictable. So we have a 2 that goes to a 1. We have a 7 that goes to a 1. And then we have a similar motion where 7, 6, 7, 1 appears like here. So we have 7, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, 1. So it's sort of a shorter version of that where the end result is still the same. This 1 is sort of happening in passing. And then there's a moment here where we end on 7. Now this is not the end of the phrase. I put an ellipses here to show that the phrase continues. And the reason that I left it blank was so that you can continue this analysis. So you have the piece title. I'm gonna leave the PDF of the score in the description, which you can get through the class notes, and you can continue doing this sort of analysis. So as you do this, I would encourage you not to look note to note to note to note and think that these things are not happening. Because as we see in the first system, we can sort of see the way that Chopin is drawing our attention to these strategic points, 1, 3, and 5, by using passing tones, unexpected delays of resolutions, and that's the way that we can create tension in the phrase. So these are the kinds of things that a lot of performers are going to do intuitively. If you notice, when I perform this, there are certain stretches of time before you get to the resolution that feels the most stable. For example, this 3 here, which is the apex of this opening phrase. I stretched this beat right before I get to the 3, so it feels like the tension is growing, and it must be discharged on this 3. Let's look at another example in minor. This is going to be from Chopin's Opus 48 number 1, also a nocturne. So I'm going to write out the score, and as I write it out, try to look for the same clues that we looked for before. So starting and ending points are going to be really helpful. This one might be a little bit tricky, but I'm going to write a complete 4-bar phrase and see if you can tease out what the key is based on where things are placed in the bar and if we have a leading tone. So if we think about the circle of fifths here, we have 2 options. We have either E flat major, which is our key with 3 flats, or we have C minor. We have a D here that goes up to an E flat. So if we think about the major tendency pair 7 to 1, that might potentially work, but there are no E flats placed on strong beats. Here we have C placed on a strong beat, the downbeat, so it might be C minor, and then the ending note, C, happens here, as well as G, which is the dominant in C minor. So these clues seem to be pointing more towards C minor than E flat, simply because we don't have any E flats on strong beats. We don't really have strong 7 to 1s in strategic points. It's sort of happening in the middle. We do have C's on strong beats. We have C's elongated. We have a G that's also elongated on a strong beat, and then we close the phrase on a C. So this seems to be pointing in the direction of C minor. So now let's fill in the scale degrees, that's step 2, so that we can analyze our tendency pairs. So now that we have all of our scale degrees, we can start to look for the tendency pairs. So we first start on scale degree 5, which is somewhat stable, moves up to 6, and comes back down to 5. So if we think about the tendency pairs in minor, we have the same as in major, right? We have 2 to 1, we have 7 to 1. In this case, it's going to be raised. We have 5 to 1. We have 4 to 3, 2 to 3, and we have 6 to 5. It looks like, in this case, the first thing that we're going to see is the 6 going to a 5. After that, our 2 goes up to 3, 4 goes down to 3, 2 goes up to 3 here, 5 goes down to 1, 2 goes down to 1, 6 goes down to 5, and here we have 7 appear, but it's not raised. So a lot of the time, as you remember from the melodic minor scale, when we descend down the melodic minor scale, we're going to have a naturalized 7 that's going to descend and end up on scale degree 5. And that's what happens here. So we have a tendency of 6 to 5, but not 7 to 1 because we don't have a leading tone. And then we go 2 to 3, which is also sort of 2 to 1. And you might wonder, how do you even determine that? Why would it not just be 2 to 3 and then the 1 happens immediately after? And the reason is because of the duration. They're close enough together that we might still be able to perceive the 2 relative to the 1. So if we play that, it's going to sound like this. The proximity of these notes helps you to be able to group them together so that the 3 doesn't feel like the ultimate landing point. It's rather the 1, which is more stable. So this is how we would conduct this sort of analysis in a minor key. Now, I would encourage you to continue looking at this score and work through the analysis while it's diatonic, because in a lot of music from this time period, you're going to have something which is called a modulation, which means that the key is going to change in the middle of the piece, even if the key signature stays the same. So you're going to start to see a bunch of accidentals which may not actually apply to C minor anymore. And so it wouldn't make sense to label things in C minor. So just do a few more measures to start to get a sense of how you would label these tendency pairs, and then model that in your own music. So now that you understand tendency pairs in major and minor, I would encourage you to write your own melody using these tendency pairs in strategic points. Now, if you want to establish key, it's really important that you place strong indicators 1, 3, and 5 on strong beats, or elongate them. When you make a note longer than other notes around them, it's called an agogic accent. And when you place one of these longer notes on a strong beat, it's called metric emphasis or metric accent. And so we want to use metric accents and agogic accents to reinforce the key signature that we're trying to establish with our melody. And it's going to be reinforced by the harmony. So when you're using tendency pairs, it's really important to think about how 7-1, 2-1, 4-3, 2-3, etc. are pushing towards these strategic moments. Or if you want to create additional tension in time, what you can do is you can delay the appearance of one of these notes, just like we saw in the first major example, and push it towards a later point. So you don't always have to resolve a tendency right away. See how you can noodle around that note and find nuanced ways of using tendency tones to create tension and release in your music. I look forward to hearing what you do. If you create something and post it online, then leave it in the comments. Let us know how it sounded. That way we have a sense of how these techniques are actually being used in real music by real people. I would love to see how this lesson encouraged you to get creative and to maybe push the boundaries a little bit of how you normally think about melody. In the next lesson, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about intervals, all of the nuanced intervals that we can have, how to quickly identify intervals, and so on. And then we're also going to address rhythm, because we haven't yet in this theory course, and it's pretty important as a foundational element of our understanding of music theory to understand exactly how rhythm and meter work in music. I'll see you in the next lessons.